Alright, so here goes. I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts, but life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you. I was just a regular guy, nothing special, just a man who worked hard, loved his family, and trusted the people closest to him. Thought I had it all. A beautiful wife, 2 great kids, and my best friend Jack, who had been like a brother to me for over 2 decades. Turns out, I was living a lie. It all started on a random Thursday evening. I had gotten home earlier than usual and walked into the house, expecting to see my wife, Ellie, and the kids. Instead, the house was oddly quiet. I figured maybe Ellie had taken them out, so I went to grab a beer and relax. That's when I heard voices coming from the back porch. Ellie's voice. Jack's voice. At first I was going to head out there and greet them, but something, maybe instinct, maybe just dumb luck, made me stop. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them clear as day through the open window. And what I heard froze me in place. Jack was laughing, but not in the way he normally did. It was quieter, almost smug. Come on, Elle, you know Carter's never gonna figure it out. The guy trusts you too much. He trusts me too much. Ellie sighed. I know. And I feel bad sometimes, but it's not like it really matters. I mean, he's a great provider, but you and I both know, our arrangement works better. Our arrangement. My stomach dropped. Better. Jack chuckled. You mean how you get to live like a queen while Carter plays dad to kids that aren't even his? I couldn't breathe. I think my heart actually stopped for a second. Ellie laughed too, and it was the kind of laugh she used to give me when we were younger, back when I thought I was the love of her life. Well, what was I supposed to do? Tell him the truth? He would have left, and then where would I be? He's a great father, better than you ever would have been, let's be honest. But that doesn't mean I want him the way I want you. Jack made some stupid joke about how he was the fun part of her life, and that's when I had to grip the counter to steady myself. My vision blurred. My ears rang. But it wasn't over yet. Because then, Ellie said something that made it all worse. My only regret is that my mother isn't around to shut him up if he ever did find out. She always knew how to handle him, always told me to keep things smooth, keep him happy. God, she was right. He's so easy to manipulate. My own mother. I thought I was going to be sick. I don't even remember leaving the house. One second I was standing there, listening to my wife and best friend destroy my entire life, and the next I was in my truck, driving aimlessly, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I should have stormed out there and confronted them. I should have screamed, broken something, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because right then, something in me shifted. I wasn't going to lose control. I wasn't going to break down. No. I was going to ruin them. I don't remember much about that drive, just that I kept replaying their words in my head, over and over, like some kind of sick, twisted loop. He trusts me too much. Kids that aren't even his. My mother always knew how to handle him. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind an old diner, just sitting there in the dark, gripping the wheel until my fingers went numb. The anger was there, burning under my skin, but it wasn't wild. It wasn't the kind of rage that makes a man scream and throw punches. No. It was cold. Calculated. I wasn't going to be the fool who lost his temper and gave them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd never find out. And if I did, they thought I'd crumble. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. I needed time. Time to plan. Time to make sure when I left them with nothing. That night, I drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town and checked in under a different name. I wasn't ready to go home yet. I couldn't stomach the idea of looking Ellie in the eye, pretending everything was normal. Lying next to her in our bed. Holding the kids that weren't even mine. So I sat there in that motel room, staring at the ceiling, forcing myself to think clearly. Step 1. Find out everything. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not some run-of-the-mill divorce attorney, no, I needed someone sharper. A guy I knew through work, the kind who specialized in asset protection and financial maneuvering. Carter, he greeted me. Long time, man. What's up? I took a breath. Hypothetically speaking, if a guy wanted to move all his money somewhere his wife couldn't touch it, how fast could he do it? There was a pause. Then a chuckle. Trouble at home? Something like that. Well, depends on how careful you want to be. If you don't want to raise suspicion, a few months. If you don't care about that, I could have everything set up in a few weeks. Make it happen. I gave him the details, made sure everything would be airtight. Offshore accounts, business transfers, liquidating investments, every cent I had was about to disappear. Ellie wanted to use me? Jack thought he was smarter than me? My own mother thought she could manipulate me? Fine. Let's see how they survive without the man holding everything together. I went home that night and played my part like nothing had changed. Walked through the door, kissed Ellie on the cheek, asked about the kids' day. She smiled, completely unaware that the man she thought was too trusting, too weak, was about to dismantle her entire life. Jack was over that evening, sitting on my couch, drinking my beer, laughing at my jokes like he wasn't the biggest snake I'd ever met. It took everything in me not to snap his neck right then and there. But I wasn't going to waste my energy on rage. No, I was going to be smart. I was going to take everything from them, the way they had taken everything from me. The first thing I did was move my money. Slowly, carefully. My savings, my investments, the emergency fund Ellie thought we were keeping for the kids' college, all of it started disappearing into accounts she'd never be able to touch. Offshore. Secure. I wasn't leaving a single dime behind. Then came the house. It was in both of our names, but the mortgage? That was mine. Which meant I controlled what happened to it. So I found a real estate agent who knew how to work quietly, how to handle sales without making waves. No for sale signs, no open houses. Just a few conversations with the right buyers. I gave Ellie no reason to suspect anything. Told her I had some late meetings, a couple of work trips coming up. She didn't care, probably happy to have more time with Jack. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. And that's what made Ellie slip up. It was late one night, past midnight, and I couldn't sleep. I was in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, when I heard her phone vibrate on the kitchen counter. I wouldn't have looked, but then I saw the name flash on the screen. Jack. I froze. Ellie had her phone set so messages wouldn't show on the lock screen, but I didn't need to see the words. The name alone was enough. My best friend. My wife. Texting each other in the middle of the night while I was sitting 15 feet away. I knew better than to react. Knew better than to pick up that phone and start reading, even though every part of me wanted to. Instead, I waited. A minute later, Ellie came down the hall, sleepy-eyed, in one of my t-shirts. She saw me, smiled like everything was normal, and reached for her phone. I just watched. She picked it up, checked the message, and her expression barely changed. Just a tiny smirk, a flicker of something almost smug before she typed a reply and set the phone down again. Then she walked over, slid her arms around my neck, and kissed my cheek. "Can't sleep," she murmured. I looked at her. This woman who had shared my bed for years. Who had built a life with me, had called me the love of her life. This woman who had been lying to me with a kind of ease that made my stomach turn. I forced a smile. Just thinking about the future. She laughed softly, kissed me again, and went back to bed. I sat there a little longer, swirling the whiskey in my glass, feeling the last pieces of love I had for her burn away. She had no idea her future was already gone. After that night, something inside me switched off completely. Whatever love, whatever loyalty I had left for Ellie, for Jack, for my mother, it was dead. All that was left was the plan. I moved fast. Every day, I drained more accounts, moved more money. The offshore transfers were nearly complete, and the house was already attracting buyers. I had a separate bank account under a shell company, ready to hold everything until I was gone. Ellie still kissed me every morning, still curled up next to me at night, completely oblivious that in just a few weeks, she'd have nothing. But I wasn't just going after my money, I wanted to see them crumble. Jack had a business, a little auto shop he ran with my help. See, I had loaned him the startup money years ago, no contract, just a handshake deal because I was a fool who thought friendship meant something. But now? Now I wanted my investment back. So I did what any smart man would do, I made a call. "Hey Mike. Need a favor." Mike was a guy I knew from work, the type who could make problems disappear, and create new ones. "What's up? You remember that garage I told you about? Jack's place." "Yeah. I want it buried." A pause. Then a low chuckle. You want legal, or you want messy? Legal. For now. Mike was good at finding cracks. Tax issues, licensing violations, missed payments. Jack was sloppy, too busy screwing my wife to keep his books clean. Within a few days, Mike had a full report of every weak spot in Jack's business. And just like that, the IRS was knocking. Jack had no idea I was behind it. I watched from the sidelines as he scrambled, panicked, tried to cover his tracks. But it was too late. Fines piled up. The shop's reputation tanked. His employees started quitting. I knew it wouldn't ruin him overnight, but it was a start. And then there was my mother. The woman who had known. Encouraged Ellie. Helped her keep the lie going. My own flesh and blood, betraying me like it was nothing. I could have confronted her, screamed at her, demanded answers. But what was the point? She wasn't worth my breath. Instead, I made one simple move. I cut her off. Completely. Blocked her number, removed her as a beneficiary on my accounts, even took her name out of my will. She wanted to side with Ellie? Fine. She could suffer with her. I wasn't just leaving them. I was erasing myself from their lives. And the best part? They still had no idea. The best part about revenge? Watching the panic set in before they even know they're doomed. Jack was already spiraling. The audit had him drowning in paperwork, fines piling up faster than he could handle. I made sure to swing by the shop one afternoon, just to see him sweat. When I walked in, he looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, stress written all over his face. "Man, you look rough," I said, leaning against the counter like I didn't already know why. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, the IRS is on my back. Some random audit, total BS. Can you believe it?" I shook my head, pretending to be sympathetic. "Damn, that's tough. Anything I can do?" "Nah, I just need to get through it." He forced a laugh. "Guess karma's paying me a visit." Karma? If only he knew. Meanwhile, Ellie was still playing the perfect wife, clueless that her world was crumbling beneath her. I started pulling little tricks, things that made her nervous but not suspicious. I forgot to pay the credit card bill. I started moving furniture out under the excuse of redecorating. I even mentioned a possible job relocation, just to plant the seed. And then I saw the first crack. One night, I was sitting in bed, scrolling through my phone, when Ellie walked in, looking uneasy. "Babe," she said hesitantly, sitting next to me. "Have you noticed any weird charges on our accounts?" I looked up, keeping my face neutral. "Weird how?" She chewed her lip. "I don't know, just, some money's missing. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed." I shrugged. "Probably just bills. Or maybe the kids' stuff." Her eyes flickered with doubt, but she forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." She didn't believe me. Good. That meant she'd start digging, start feeling like something was wrong, but she still wouldn't know. Not yet. And then came the biggest win of all. The house sold. Fast. A private buyer, all cash, no delays. The paperwork was done before Ellie even realized what was happening. Now, all that was left was the final blow. I just had to wait for the perfect moment to vanish. The house sale went through faster than I expected. No negotiations, no last-minute holdups. It was done. Signed, sealed, and finalized. The money hit my new offshore account, completely untouchable. Ellie had no clue that the home she thought was hers had already been sold out from under her. The best part? I still had the keys. I still had control. And I wasn't done yet. I needed to time my exit perfectly. If I left too soon, they might recover. If I dragged it out too long, they might get suspicious. No, I wanted them comfortable, still playing their little game, thinking they had it all under control, right up until the ground crumbled beneath them. Jack's situation was going downhill fast. The audit was bleeding him dry, and his shop was barely staying afloat. I made sure to feed him false hope, showing up with a beer in hand, pretending to be the same old best friend he thought he still had. "You ever think about getting an investor?" I asked one night as we sat outside his garage, pretending to care about his problems. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Man, I'd love to. But after this audit, no one's gonna touch me. My credit's wrecked, and my business looks like a disaster. I took a slow sip of my beer. Damn. Sucks. He nodded, completely oblivious that I was the reason his life was falling apart. But I wasn't finished with him yet. A week later, I made another move. I knew Jack had taken out a small business loan a while back, and I knew he was barely keeping up with payments. So, I called in a favor from an old college buddy, a guy who worked in finance. With just a little push, the bank reevaluated Jack's risk level. The result? His interest rates skyrocketed. The next time I saw him, he looked defeated. "I don't know what the hell is happening," he muttered, staring down at his drink. "First the IRS, now the bank's coming after me. It's like I'm cursed." Cursed? No, buddy. You were just stupid. While Jack was drowning, Ellie was getting paranoid. She started checking our finances more often. I caught her going through my desk one night when she thought I was asleep. She didn't find anything, of course. I had already cleared out any paperwork, shredded anything she could use against me. But she felt it. One evening, as we were having dinner, she finally brought it up. "Hey, have you been taking money out of our savings?" I set my fork down, feigning confusion. "What? No. Why?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I checked today, and it's a lot lower than I remember. I know we had more in there." I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Babe, we've had a lot of expenses lately. The kids' stuff, groceries, bills. It adds up." She nodded, but she wasn't convinced. I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to realize something was wrong. That's when I knew it was almost time. The last thing I needed to do was secure my exit. I already had a new identity set up overseas, clean passport, new banking details, everything. My lawyer had taken care of it all, ensuring that when I disappeared, I wouldn't be found. But there was one last thing I wanted. I wanted to see the look on Ellie's face when she realized I was gone. So, I waited. I let her squirm, let her keep searching for answers she wouldn't find. Let Jack keep thinking he could fix his crumbling life. I was in complete control, and neither of them had the slightest clue. Then one night, I set everything in motion. I booked my flight. A one-way ticket. No return. And the next morning, while Ellie was in the shower, I grabbed my bag, took one last look around the house that was no longer ours, and walked out the door for the last time. The morning I left, the sun was just starting to rise. The house was quiet, except for the sound of Ellie's shower running. I stood there for a second, my bag slung over my shoulder, listening. This was it. The last time I'd ever set foot in this place. The last time I'd ever pretend to be the fool they thought I was. I walked out, shut the door behind me, and drove off without looking back. By the time Ellie stepped out of the bathroom, I was already miles away. My phone was off, my accounts were drained, and my name was wiped from anything that tied me to them. I wasn't just leaving them, I was erasing myself from their world. No warnings. No explanations. Just gone. I imagined how it played out. Maybe she called my name from the bedroom, expecting me to be in the kitchen making coffee like I always did. Maybe she checked her phone, saw nothing from me, and assumed I just stepped out for a bit. But then, as the hours passed, the panic would start creeping in. She'd call me, straight to voicemail. She'd text, no reply. And then she'd start checking, my closet half empty. My things missing. The bank accounts? Empty. That's when it would hit her. I was gone. And not just for the day. For good. I didn't need to be there to see her unravel. I already knew exactly how it would go. She'd start dialing my mother, her last desperate attempt to get answers. And my mother, who I had cut off without so much as a goodbye, would realize at that moment that she had lost me too. Jack would be the next call. Maybe he'd come rushing over, still pretending to be the concerned best friend. Maybe he'd walk through the front door, expecting to find Ellie crying in the kitchen, expecting to comfort her while secretly enjoying the fact that I was gone. But then, he'd see the real damage. The unpaid mortgage notices, the locked accounts, the house that no longer belonged to them. He'd realize his own life was just as ruined as hers. I pictured them, standing in that empty house, staring at each other, finally understanding what I had done. No money. No home. No safety net. Just the mess they had created, now crumbling around them. And me? I was already halfway across the world, sitting in a first-class seat, sipping a drink, watching the clouds roll by. Free. They deserved every second of what was coming. And the best part? It was only the beginning. I didn't just vanish. I made sure to watch from a distance, to see the fallout unfold exactly how I planned it. From a sleek high-rise hotel in another country, I sipped my morning coffee and checked the dummy email account I had set up. I wasn't stupid. I knew Ellie and Jack would try to track me down, so I left just enough breadcrumbs to let me watch their downfall without them getting anywhere close. It started with Ellie. Her first move was desperation. She called me over and over. I could imagine her pacing our bedroom, clutching her phone, hitting redial like it would somehow bring me back. Then when she realized she wasn't getting through, she probably sat down at her laptop, expecting to log into our accounts and see some kind of financial cushion. But instead, zero. Next came Jack. He must have thought he could fix things. Maybe he rushed over to her, pretending to be the rock she needed, the one steady thing in her life. But he was already drowning himself. The shop was failing. The IRS was still breathing down his neck. And without me around to be their shared punching bag, they only had one person left to blame, each other. I imagined how that conversation went. Maybe Ellie accused Jack of rushing into her arms too fast, of not trying hard enough to stop me from leaving. Maybe Jack snapped back, saying if she had played her role better, I never would have suspected a thing. Or maybe, just maybe, Ellie let something slip, something about how my mother had encouraged the whole thing, about how long this lie had really been going on. Wouldn't that be something? Jack standing there, realizing that he wasn't just a lover, he was a tool. Just another pawn in Ellie's game. I smiled to myself at the thought. Meanwhile, back home, my mother must have been sitting by her phone, waiting for me to reach out. She probably assumed I'd come crawling back eventually, too broken to cut her off completely. But the silence was going to eat her alive. She had been the mastermind, the one who convinced Ellie to keep the lie going. She must have thought she was so clever, so untouchable. But now? She was alone. No son. No connection to my money. No control. I knew she'd try to reach me, but I had already changed my number. My new identity was solid. I didn't exist to them anymore. Let them scramble. Let them fall apart. I was done playing their fool. And the best part? This was only week 1. I knew it wouldn't take long for reality to sink in. Ellie had spent years living in comfort, playing the loving wife while keeping her secret tucked away. Now, with no house, no money, and no stability, she was getting a crash course in what it meant to be powerless. A few days after I disappeared, I got confirmation that the new owners had officially taken possession of the house. Ellie was served an eviction notice, probably the moment she truly understood that I had planned everything down to the last detail. She had no clue where to go, no safety net to fall back on. Jack? He was no better off. The financial noose around his neck kept tightening. The loan increase had wrecked him, the audit was still bleeding him dry, and customers were avoiding his garage like it was cursed. The guy had spent years thinking he was invincible, that he could sleep with his best friend's wife and still come out on top. But now? He had nothing. And then, the inevitable happened, they turned on each other. I wish I could have seen it in person, but the next best thing was the online meltdown. Jack's sister posted a vague rant about people getting what they deserve, and not long after, I saw that Ellie had unfollowed Jack on everything. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together. The moment things got hard, they cracked. Jack must have realized that Ellie was more of a liability than an escape. Maybe he accused her of ruining his life. Maybe she threw it back in his face, reminding him that he had been the one who came after her. Either way, their little fantasy world was dead. Ellie, desperate and with nowhere else to go, did the one thing I was waiting for. She called my mother. And my mother, ***, the woman who had orchestrated all of this, who had told Ellie to keep me in the dark, who had spent years playing the puppet master, ***, finally understood what it meant to be left with nothing. Because I was never coming back. Let them sink. Let them drown in the mess they created. I was free. And I wasn't even close to being finished. I knew Ellie would crack first. She had always been the type who needed control, needed to feel like she was the one pulling the strings. But without me, without the home I had built, without the steady income keeping her comfortable, she had no strings left to pull. She was free-falling, and there was no safety net waiting to catch her. The house was gone. I had made sure of that. She must have been blindsided when the official notice came in, probably thought it was some mistake, some clerical error. But no, it was very real. And by the time she realized that her name wasn't on the property anymore, it was too late to do anything about it. She tried to fight it, of course. Maybe she called the bank, demanding answers. Maybe she tried to log into our accounts, only to find that every single dollar had vanished. I could picture her, pacing the empty living room, phone in hand, calling everyone she could think of, realizing she had no one left to help her. Jack was drowning, too. I knew it wouldn't take much to break him, and it didn't. His garage was already on the verge of collapse. The increased loan payments had buried him in debt, and the IRS wasn't backing off. I could imagine him sitting in his tiny office, staring at the final notice from the bank, realizing that he was out of options. And then, just like I predicted, they turned on each other. Jack must have seen the writing on the wall before Ellie did. Maybe he realized that she was dead weight, that keeping her around wasn't going to fix his problems. Or maybe it was Ellie who made the first move, accusing him of ruining her life, of dragging her down with him. Either way, it ended with a fight. A big one. I know this because Jack's sister, who never liked Ellie to begin with, went off on social media. A long passive-aggressive rant about how some people deserve what's coming to them, and liars will always be left with nothing. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she was talking about. Ellie and Jack were done. And I was sitting thousands of miles away, watching it all unfold from a distance, enjoying every second of it. I had been waiting for it. The last, desperate move. And it came right on schedule. Ellie called my mother. She must have thought she still had an ally there, that my mother, who had helped her keep the lie going for years, would step in and fix things. But what Ellie didn't realize was that I had already cut her loose, too. I had no doubt the conversation was ugly. Maybe Ellie demanded answers, begged for help, pleaded for money that wasn't there. And my mother? Maybe she tried to reach out to me, only to be met with radio silence. I imagined her sitting there, gripping the phone, the reality sinking in. Her son was gone. I was never coming back. She had thrown me aside, played me like a fool, and now? She had to live with the consequences. Ellie and Jack had nothing. My mother had nothing. And I had everything. They thought they could betray me and come out unscathed. They thought I would crumble, break, fall apart. But instead, I burned their entire world to the ground. And the best part? They still had more to lose. Ellie was running out of moves. Jack was broke, my mother was cut off, and I was a ghost. She had spent years thinking she was the one in control, manipulating everyone around her, keeping her little secrets tucked away. But now? She was alone, and she knew it. I imagined her waking up in that empty house for the last time, knowing she had no choice but to leave. Maybe she stood there for a minute, taking in the wreckage of her life, the unpaid bills stacked on the counter, the empty closet where my things used to be. Maybe she even felt a flicker of regret, not because she lost me, but because she lost the security I gave her. She must have packed in a hurry, stuffing clothes into bags, calling whoever she could for help. But there was no one left. Jack was barely holding his own life together. My mother was useless to her now. She had no one. And Jack? He was just as screwed. The shop was done. After weeks of fines, debt, and legal threats, he had no choice but to close down. I had seen it coming, but I let him believe he had time, let him think he could fix things, right up until the moment he couldn't. I imagined him standing outside his garage, staring at the foreclosure notice taped to the door, his hands clenched into fists. Maybe he thought back to all the times we had sat in that office together, back when I was the idiot who actually wanted to see him succeed. I bet he wished I was still that man. But that man was gone. I had spent years thinking Jack was my brother, my closest friend. Now he was just another casualty. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was checking my email, the dummy account I had set up just to keep an eye on things, when I saw a message from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, no introduction. Just a single sentence. I know you did this. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to guess. Jack. I smirked, leaning back in my chair, reading the words over again. He knew. Maybe he didn't have proof, but he knew. I could picture him sitting in some cheap apartment, the weight of his failures crashing down on him, finally realizing that this wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't just karma. This was me. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He could scream into the void all he wanted. It wouldn't bring his business back, wouldn't undo the damage. It was over. I expected her to go crawling to someone, but I didn't expect her to try reaching me. A week after the house was officially gone, I got another email. This time, it was from Ellie. Unlike Jack's, hers was long. Pages of desperate, pathetic excuses. She said she never meant to hurt me, that she got caught up in something she couldn't control. She admitted she had made mistakes, but insisted she had still loved me in her own way. That she wished we could talk. And then, at the very end, she slipped in the real reason she was writing. I just need a little help getting back on my feet. I laughed. Actually laughed. She still thought she could manipulate me. Still thought I had even an ounce of sympathy left for her. Still thought I would save her. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I blocked her. I imagined the moment she realized I wasn't going to respond, when she stared at that inbox, waiting for a reply that would never come. Maybe she cried. Maybe she cursed my name. Either way, she had finally lost. Jack was ruined. Ellie was begging. My mother was alone. And me? I was living my best life, far away from all of them. But I wasn't finished yet. Because soon, they'd see just how much better I was doing without them. I thought blocking Ellie would be the last time I'd have to think about her. Thought she'd finally crawl away, accept defeat, and disappear into whatever miserable life she had left. But I should have known better. People like her don't give up easily. A few weeks passed. I had settled into my new life, waking up every morning in a high-rise apartment with a view that stretched for miles, living a life Ellie and Jack could only dream of. No stress. No lies. Just peace. But then, out of nowhere, I got a message. Not from Ellie, not from Jack, from a mutual friend. Dude. Ellie's been asking about you. She thinks you're with someone new. I stared at my screen for a second before shaking my head. Of course, she did. Of course, after all this time, after everything she lost, she was still obsessing over me. And funny enough, she wasn't entirely wrong. I had met someone. Not that I owed anyone an explanation, but yeah, after months of rebuilding, after finally shaking off every last piece of my old life, I found someone who was the exact opposite of Ellie. Smart, loyal, and most importantly, not a liar. A woman who knew what she wanted, who didn't need to use deception to keep someone around. She knew my past, knew my story, and still looked at me like I was the kind of man who deserved happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. So when I got that message, I did the pettiest thing possible. I made sure Ellie saw everything. I posted a single picture, just one. Nothing flashy, nothing over the top. Just me, standing in front of a luxury car, my new fiancé's hand in mine. No captions. No explanation. But enough for Ellie to know exactly what she had lost. It took less than a day for the fallout to begin. I don't know where she saw it first. Maybe through an old friend's account. Maybe she was still pathetic enough to check my socials from time to time. But she saw it. Oh, she saw it. And she lost it. 2 days later, I got another email. This time, it was angry. Really, Carter? You move on this fast? After everything? You just throw me away like I meant nothing. I laughed when I read it. Throw her away? She had spent years lying to me, making a fool out of me, and now she wanted to act like she was the victim? But the next part was even better. I hope you know she'll never love you like I did. I had to sit back after reading that one. She was delusional. Still clinging to the fantasy that what we had was real, that she had ever loved me in the first place. But I didn't reply. I didn't even give her the satisfaction of a response. I let her stew in her own failure. Ellie wasn't the only one who noticed my new life. A week after my post, I got another message, this time from Jack's ex. Hey, just thought you'd want to know, Jack saw your post. He didn't take it well. Good. Apparently, he had been trying to piece his life back together, but after seeing how well I was doing, he snapped. Got drunk, showed up at a party, started ranting about how I was a snake and ruined his life. People laughed in his face. Jack, the guy who used to act like he had everything figured out, was now nothing more than a joke. Through all of this, there was one person I hadn't heard from, my mother. I knew she had tried to contact me at first, had probably left voicemail after voicemail, trying to guilt me into forgiving her. But when she realized I wasn't playing along, she went quiet. She must have known. She lost me. Not just financially, but completely. No more calls. No more control. Nothing. She had spent years making sure Ellie kept her little secret. She thought she was the smartest person in the room, always playing the long game. But in the end, she lost. And I never looked back. The best part about revenge isn't the moment you destroy someone. It's watching them realize they destroyed themselves. Ellie lost everything: her home, her security, her reputation. Jack was a joke, a washed-up loser with no business and no future. My mother, the woman who thought she would always have control, had nothing. And me? I was free. Ellie must have gone through every stage of grief after seeing that picture. First, denial. Maybe she convinced herself that it was fake, that I was just trying to hurt her. Then anger, judging by the furious email she sent, the one I never responded to. But eventually, reality set in. I had moved on. I was never coming back. I could imagine how that must have felt for her. She had spent years believing she had me wrapped around her finger, that no matter what, I'd always be there. But now, all the security, all the comfort, all the control she once had, gone. She had gambled on Jack, on a fantasy where she could have it all, me as the provider, Jack as the secret thrill. And she lost. I heard from a mutual friend that she was living in some rundown apartment, barely scraping by, bouncing between temp jobs because her housewife years had left her with no real career. She was struggling. And no one felt sorry for her. Not her old friends, not Jack, not even my mother. The woman who once thought she could manipulate me into staying now had nothing to offer Ellie. And Ellie, who had spent so many years lying, suddenly found herself with no one left to lie to. Jack, on the other hand, was unraveling faster. After his business collapsed, he moved in with a cousin, but even that didn't last long. Word got around about what he did, and no one wanted to deal with him. Even his own family was ashamed of him. Last I heard, he was working a dead-end job, showing up drunk half the time, still bitter that I had walked away while his life crumbled. One night, I got a message from an unknown number. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. You think you won? You're pathetic. You'll never be happy. Jack. It was funny, really. He still thought this was some kind of game, still convinced that this was about winning. But what he didn't get, what neither of them ever understood, was that I didn't do this to win. I did it because I was done. Done with being used. Done with being lied to. Done with them. I didn't reply. Just blocked the number and went back to living the life they would never have. My new fiancée knew everything. I had told her the whole story one night, expecting maybe a little hesitation, maybe some doubt. But instead she just smiled, squeezed my hand, and said, "Their loss." And she was right. Ellie could have had a husband who would have done anything for her. Jack could have had a friend who had his back for life. My mother could have had a son who would have taken care of her. But they threw it all away. And now, as I sat in my new home, looking at the woman who actually deserved me, I realized something. For the first time in years, I was truly happy. And they? They were nothing. The funny thing about revenge is that it's never a single moment. It's not some dramatic confrontation, not a grand speech, not some cinematic ending where you walk away from the explosion without looking back. No. Revenge is patience. It's slow. It's watching the people who wronged you unravel under the weight of their own choices. And the best part? You don't even have to lift a finger. Ellie learned that the hard way. At first, she tried to act like she was fine. I imagine she put on a brave face, tried to convince herself that she could land on her feet, that she could rebuild. Maybe she told herself that losing the house and the money was just a temporary setback. That if she played her cards right, she'd find another man to take care of her, another fool to fund her lifestyle. But there was no one left. People talk, and in a town like ours, people remember. She couldn't outrun the whispers, the stares, the quiet judgment. It didn't take long for her to realize that the safety net she had counted on didn't exist. No friends to take her in. No family willing to help. Just a string of cheap apartments, bad decisions, and the slow creeping realization that she had destroyed the only good thing she ever had. Jack was no better. For a while, he must have told himself that he could recover. That he could rebuild his business, fix his finances, maybe even convince people that he was the real victim. But life has a way of catching up to people like him. His business was gone, his reputation was in shambles, and no one trusted him anymore. He tried to find new work, but people remembered what he had done. No one wanted to hire a man who had betrayed his best friend, who had been exposed as a liar and a cheat. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up working at a rundown repair shop in another town, barely making enough to get by. The guy who once laughed behind my back while sleeping with my wife was now nothing but a cautionary tale. And my mother? Silence. She had tried at first, I know that much. Must have left voicemail after voicemail, expecting me to cave, expecting me to come running back. But as the weeks passed, as the months stretched on with no response, she must have finally understood. She had lost me. For good. No more calls. No more guilt trips. No more manipulation. Just a woman sitting in her house, alone, realizing that she had pushed her only son away forever. And the most satisfying part? I didn't have to do anything anymore. I had won the moment I walked away. By the time a year had passed, I had forgotten what it felt like to be angry. I wasn't waiting for updates, wasn't checking to see how badly their lives had fallen apart. Because while they were stuck in the past, drowning in the wreckage of their own mistakes, I was free. I had built something new. Something real. One evening, I was sitting on the balcony of my new home, the city stretching out in front of me, a glass of whiskey in my hand. My fiancée was inside, laughing at something on TV, the kind of carefree, genuine happiness that I had forgotten was possible. She knew everything. Every ugly detail. I had told her one night, expecting hesitation, maybe even pity. But all she had done was take my hand, squeeze it, and say, "Their loss." And she was right. Ellie could have had a husband who would have done anything for her. Jack could have had a friend who would have had his back for life. My mother could have had a son who would have taken care of her when she got old. But they threw it all away. Now they had nothing. And I had everything. My fiancée stepped outside, her arms wrapping around me as she rested her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I thought about it for a second. About Ellie, about Jack, about my mother. About the years I had spent loving people who never deserved it. And then I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I'm better than okay." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Because the best revenge is living a life they'll never have.